Your Honor, the defendant was arrested in Rittenhouse Square after a disturbance involving minors and a homeless veteran, the young prosecutor stated, without emotion. The man standing at the defense table bowed his head, his gray hair falling over weathered features that once graced billboards from Times Square to Sunset Boulevard. "I only wanted to stop them from hurting him," he said quietly. A few soft chuckles rippled through the courtroom, but the judge didn't laugh. She had just heard the defendant's full name: Sylvester Stallone. The air seemed to shift. Who was this man now, and why had the judge's hand trembled slightly as she adjusted her glasses? Stay with us as we uncover the forgotten story of a hero whose real victories were never captured by a camera. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss the incredible stories that will restore your faith in courage and compassion. Sylvester Stallone, 78, was no longer the cinematic titan whose name once drew standing ovations. Here, in a small Philadelphia municipal courtroom, he wore no costume of invincibility, no Hollywood spotlight to lend him grandeur. Just an old leather jacket creased by time, dark jeans frayed at the cuffs, and boots with soles worn thin from too many quiet miles, walked alone. His body bore the marks of both screen battles and real ones, knees that twinged with every step, a back stiff from decades of punishing training, hands rougher now than any makeup artist could disguise. Outside this room, few even realized Stallone had returned to his roots, living quietly in a modest row house not far from South Street. No red carpets, no limousines. Just an aging man trying to honor a promise he made to himself long ago, to never forget where he came from, and to never look away when someone needed help, especially someone invisible to most, like Hank Russell, a Vietnam veteran who had lived in Rittenhouse Square's shadowed corners longer than many of the park's trees had stood. 3 nights earlier, temperatures had dropped sharply, the first cruel taste of a Philadelphia winter sweeping through the city. Hank had bundled himself against the base of a bronze statue, clutching the remnants of a blanket and a battered duffel bag. The teenagers appeared shortly before midnight, high on youthful bravado, kicking Hank's possessions across the cobblestones, laughing as they jeered at his helplessness. It was supposed to be harmless, they would later claim. Just kids fooling around. Stallone had seen it all from across the street, his breath steaming in the cold air. He had just finished a shift at a veterans outreach shelter he secretly funded, too tired even to feel his own joints aching. But when he saw the way Hank struggled to defend himself, saw the fear that should never darken the eyes of a man who once wore his nation's uniform, something deep within him reignited. He crossed the street in 3 purposeful strides and stepped between Hank and the boys, his voice low but firm. "Enough. Back away." The confrontation escalated quickly. A shove, a shouted insult. In defending Hank, Stallone pushed one of the teenagers off balance. The police, arriving amid the chaos, had a choice to make, and like so many times in real life, they got it wrong at first. Stallone and 2 of the boys were arrested. The homeless man, too terrified to speak, had disappeared into the night before officers could take a statement. Now, in courtroom C4, the world saw only part of the story. An elderly man in trouble. A famous name dulled by years. A once great hero reduced to a court docket number. Judge Margaret Donovan, respected and tough, glanced down at the file again, heart hammering harder than she wanted to admit. Sylvester Stallone. Not a name you forgot, even after years of grinding through civil disputes and petty crime. She remembered sitting in the third row of the old Devon Theater back in 1976, a scared kid from a broken home, watching Rocky with wide eyes, watching someone who looked rough, sounded rough, climb every mountain placed before him, not with money or privilege, but with pure, stubborn heart. She had carried that spirit with her through law school, through every failure and disappointment life threw her way. And now, the man who taught her to fight was standing before her, head bowed, as if he no longer believed he was worth fighting for. "Mr. Stallone, how do you plead?" she asked, her voice catching slightly. "Guilty, Your Honor." His words were simple, worn at the edges. Someone in the back of the courtroom muttered, "Hollywood's washed up. Should have stayed in L.A." The judge shot a look that froze the whisper midair. Sylvester Stallone, defendant. The world outside had long since moved on, chasing newer, flashier idols. But inside these four walls, for reasons even she couldn't fully explain yet, Judge Donovan refused to let him fade so easily. "The court will take a 15-minute recess," she announced suddenly, her gavel striking with unusual force. "The defendant will remain seated." Murmurs flared as people shuffled, reporters whispering urgently into phones. Stallone simply sat there, unmoving, his hands resting lightly on his thighs. He was no stranger to judgment, of all kinds. He had weathered box office failures, public divorces, mockery about his speech, his body, his choices. He had spent decades clawing respect out of a business that often treated him like a punchline. And none of that had prepared him for the brutal silence that comes when even strangers think you no longer matter. In her chambers, Judge Donovan leaned heavily against her desk, her mind racing. She logged onto her secure court network and quickly searched the name. Not for movie credits, those she knew by heart. For news, community reports, anything recent. The search results hit her like a blow. In the past 10 years, Stallone had quietly donated millions to charities supporting wounded veterans. He had funded a transitional shelter in Camden under a different name. He had volunteered, without press, without cameras, at soup kitchens, at literacy programs in West Philly, at battered women's shelters across New Jersey. He had never sought recognition. He had simply shown up where he was needed. One quiet man against a sea of brokenness. He was not the forgotten man. He was the man who refused to forget. Judge Donovan sat back, stunned. Sylvester Stallone had spent the twilight of his life living the values he had once only portrayed on screen. Fighting for the underdogs who had no cheering crowds, no training montages, no victories written by screenwriters. Back in the courtroom, Stallone barely noticed the bailiff peeking at him with growing curiosity. He thought instead about Hank, about how, sometimes, the hardest battles were the ones fought alone, with no audience and no applause. He closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. Somewhere in this vast, often indifferent city, a man slept a little safer tonight because an old fighter refused to walk past suffering. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Judge Donovan returned to the courtroom with a new heaviness in her steps, her robe feeling heavier somehow, as she settled into her chair. She glanced once more at the man before her, this weary fighter whose battles now lived not on a movie screen, but in the quiet, unseen alleys of real life. She tapped her gavel lightly, signaling the court back into session. "Mr. Stallone," before proceeding, "this court believes it would be appropriate to hear testimony from individuals relevant to the events in question." Stallone looked up, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. In all his imaginings of how today might unfold, he had not pictured this. The bailiff opened the double doors at the rear of the room, and a small procession entered. A man in a weathered army jacket moved first, his limp telling a story long before his mouth did. Behind him came a woman with salt and pepper hair, wearing the uniform of the Salvation Army. Then a young man in a battered Phillies cap, pushing an elderly woman in a wheelchair, adorned with faded yellow ribbons tied along the frame. They filed in silently, each face marked by lines of hardship, but eyes glowing with purpose. The judge nodded to the first man. "Please state your name for the record." "Hank Russell, ma'am. Vietnam veteran, 101st Airborne." He cleared his throat, a rawness to his voice, not from nerves, but from years of swallowing pride. "I was the one Mr. Stallone tried to protect that night. He didn't start anything. He didn't raise his hands until they shoved him. He was just trying to help, and not just that night. For months, he's been bringing blankets, hot meals, medicine when my legs get bad. Never asked for thanks. Never asked for anything." Hank's words hung in the air, unpolished but heavy with truth. The courtroom, filled with reporters and city clerks and curious onlookers, sat frozen, absorbing the revelation that the faded star they had dismissed as a has-been had been fighting a different kind of battle all along. The next witness, the woman from the Salvation Army, testified that Stallone had anonymously donated enough funds to keep their downtown shelter open through a brutal winter 2 years ago when city funding dried up. No cameras, no speeches. He just showed up one afternoon with a check and a box of used coats he had collected himself. The young man from the Phillies cap spoke of how he had been on the verge of homelessness after aging out of foster care, and it was a scholarship fund started by Stallone that gave him the chance to go to community college. Each testimony peeled back the layers, revealing not a fallen star clinging to past glory, but a man who had redefined heroism on his own terms, without applause, without scripts. Judge Donovan listened carefully, each word weighing heavier on her conscience. She thought of the times she herself had walked past a bundled figure on a bench, or a man holding a cardboard sign at a freeway exit, telling herself it wasn't her problem. Stallone hadn't walked past. He had stepped into their brokenness and made it his own. She cleared her throat, steadying her voice. "Mr. Stallone, you have pleaded guilty to disorderly conduct. However, given the circumstances now presented to this court, I am ordering an immediate review of your case and suspending all proceedings pending further investigation. You are released on your own recognizance, effective immediately." There was a stir in the courtroom, some gasps, some claps muffled quickly by glares from the court officers. Stallone stood slowly, unsure if he had heard correctly, his body instinctively bracing for the weight of another disappointment that somehow did not come. "You are free to go for now, Mr. Stallone, but please remain available for further inquiry." The judge's tone softened. "Thank you for reminding us what real strength looks like." Stallone nodded once, the movement stiff but full of dignity. He gathered his jacket and walked out the side door of the courtroom, passing the rows of strangers who suddenly no longer looked at him with pity or disdain, but with something like respect. Outside, the air was sharp and cold, the December wind cutting through the city streets like a knife. News cameras swarmed the steps of the courthouse, reporters shouting his name, shoving microphones toward his face. "Mr. Stallone, Are you planning a public statement? Mr. Stallone, will you be pressing charges against the teens? Mr. Stallone, are you coming back to Hollywood? He said nothing, pushing past them with the ease of a man who had spent half his life navigating crowds both adoring and hostile. He had no desire to explain himself to people who only now found him interesting because the world had suddenly decided his story was marketable again. He walked 3 blocks down Market Street, shoulders hunched against the cold, until he reached a tiny diner that hadn't changed since the 70s. He slid into a cracked vinyl booth and ordered coffee, black, no sugar. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with a name tag that read Dolores, placed the cup before him with a tired smile. You look like you could use something stronger, hun. Stallone smiled back, the first real smile in days. Coffee's fine. It's been a long morning, she chuckled. Ain't it always? News vans rolled slowly past the diner windows, but Stallone ignored them. He wrapped his hands around the chipped ceramic mug, letting the warmth seep into his fingers. He thought of Hank, of the others he had met at the shelter, and the park, and the soup kitchen down on Christian Street. He thought about the quiet way broken people carried their burdens, invisible to the bustling city that claimed to be the cradle of liberty. He thought about his own journey, from rejected actor to global icon, to this strange twilight existence where fame meant nothing and a warm coat meant everything. He had fought so hard to become a somebody, only to realize that the true battle was to remain a decent man when no one was watching. Sylvester Stallone, the quiet champion. No headlines could capture it properly. No trending hashtag could do justice to the slow, patient work of kindness. But maybe, just maybe, the truth would ripple outward from today's small courtroom, touching lives he would never meet, inspiring someone somewhere to stand up when it would be easier to walk away. Outside, a light snow began to fall, frosting the sidewalks and softening the harsh outlines of the city. Stallone finished his coffee, tucked a few bills under the cup, and rose slowly from the booth. There was still work to do, still people to reach. Heroes don't always wear capes or championship belts. Sometimes they wear old jackets, carry scars no one sees, and step forward when everyone else steps back. If you believe in everyday heroes and stories that still matter, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that bell so you never miss another true, inspiring story that reminds us all of the strength in kindness. The next morning, the story broke across every local news outlet in Philadelphia, then spread like wildfire across the country. Sylvester Stallone, from movie hero to real-life savior, one headline blared. Talk shows debated whether Stallone's quiet service work reflected a changing American ideal of what it meant to be a hero. Social media exploded with old clips from Rocky, fans reminiscing about how his underdog story had shaped their own lives. A television reporter managed to track down Hank Russell, who spoke in rough, hesitant sentences about the night Stallone had stepped in to protect him. He didn't have to, Hank said, staring into the camera with misty eyes. He's not just a fighter in movies. He's a fighter for real people like me. Within 24 hours, Stallone's simple act of compassion had reignited a fire in the American consciousness, a reminder that heroism wasn't measured in millions made or awards won, but in who you stood up for when no one was watching. Stallone, however, stayed quiet. Offers poured in from major networks asking for exclusive interviews. Publishers proposed memoir deals. City officials floated ideas for public ceremonies. Stallone turned them all down politely. He wasn't interested in polishing a legacy. He was interested in using the unexpected attention to do something that mattered. Through a friend at the shelter, he quietly arranged a meeting with the Philadelphia Veterans Administration and local nonprofits. He proposed a plan to convert several abandoned municipal buildings into transitional housing for homeless veterans, combining temporary shelter with job training and medical services. He promised to cover the initial costs himself, using funds he had squirreled away over years of frugal living, knowing someday the money would be needed for something bigger than comfort. Word of his plan reached the mayor's office, and before long, a press conference was scheduled at City Hall. On a cold, gray Friday morning, Stallone stood behind a simple podium, wearing the same old leather jacket and jeans he had worn to court. No tailored suit, no entourage. His speech was short, direct, and unpolished. I don't want statues. I don't want streets named after me. I want action. We got men and women out there who fought for this country, and now they're sleeping on benches and under bridges. We owe them better than that. So let's stop talking and start doing. The small crowd of veterans, social workers, and city employees erupted into applause, the sound raw and genuine. Within weeks, the project broke ground. Volunteers showed up by the dozens, many citing Stallone's story as the reason they finally decided to help. Construction companies donated materials. Restaurants promised meals. A retired Army general who had once commanded troops in Iraq sent a personal letter pledging support, calling Stallone's initiative a long overdue call to national conscience. Meanwhile, Stallone remained a quiet presence at the work sites, swinging a hammer, unloading trucks, handing out coffee and sandwiches to volunteers. He refused photo ops. When journalists appeared, he quietly slipped away, preferring to let the work speak for itself. One evening, as he sat on the steps of one of the new shelters, watching the sun dip behind the Philadelphia skyline, Judge Donovan joined him. She wore jeans and a Temple University sweatshirt, a far cry from her court robes. She handed him a cup of coffee, and for a long moment they sat in companionable silence. Two veterans of very different kinds of battles. You know, she said finally, you didn't just change Hank's life that night. You changed mine too? Stallone gave a small, tired smile. It's funny, he said. When I was young, I thought changing the world meant being bigger than life. Now I think it just means being there. Being the one who doesn't walk away. As winter gave way to spring, the first residents moved into the newly christened second round house, a nod to Stallone's famous movie character who always found a way to get back up after being knocked down. Hank Russell was among the first to receive keys to a small, clean room with a real bed, a private bathroom, and a window overlooking a park where the trees were just beginning to bud. When he was handed the keys, he clutched them like a prize, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. He hugged Stallone fiercely, whispering a gruff, "Thank you, brother. I thought nobody saw us anymore." The ceremony marking the opening of the second roundhouse was modest by design. No red carpets, no celebrity guests. Just veterans, their families, city workers, and volunteers gathering to celebrate a victory won not through fame or fortune, but through stubborn compassion. Stallone spoke briefly, his voice thick with emotion. "This isn't charity," he said. "It's a down payment on a debt we can never fully repay." A local high school choir sang "America the Beautiful," And several veterans stood to share stories of their own struggles, their voices cracking with the unfamiliar sensation of hope. One photo from that day went viral without Stallone even knowing it. It showed him, head bowed, one hand resting gently on Hank's shoulder, the sunlight catching the silver in their hair. Two battle-scarred souls finding shelter not just in walls, but in one another. The caption read simply, "Some heroes never stop fighting." As months passed, Stallone's initiative inspired similar projects in other cities: Baltimore, Detroit, St. Louis. Veterans groups wrote letters thanking him for reminding the nation of its promises. Young men and women who had grown up admiring Rocky Balboa now spoke of a deeper respect for the man behind the character. Sylvester Stallone had not planned a comeback, but life had given him one nonetheless, the kind that mattered most. On the first Veterans Day, after the opening of Second Roundhouse, Stallone stood at the base of the Rocky Steps at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the very place where his fictional counterpart had once thrown his fists triumphantly into the air. A simple plaque had been installed nearby, funded by anonymous donors, with an inscription that read, "In honor of those who fight battles, seen and unseen. Keep punching." Surrounded by veterans in wheelchairs, children waving flags, and old-timers who remembered when he was just another struggling actor with a dream, Stallone spoke quietly, but firmly, into the crisp November air. "You don't need gloves or a ring to be a fighter," he said. "You just need heart. And the courage to stand when others sit, to speak when others are silent, to keep swinging even when you're tired and hurting and the whole world's telling you it's over." The crowd erupted into cheers, not for a movie star, but for a man who had become something far rarer, an ordinary hero who refused to let the final bell toll without one last fight. Stallone stood there for a moment longer, soaking it in, not as fame, but as affirmation that every late-night shift at the shelter, every blanket handed out in the dark, every act of unseen kindness had mattered. As he turned to descend the steps, Hank Russell limped forward and clasped his arm. "You gave me my second round, brother," Hank said, his voice thick. Stallone gripped his shoulder, steady and strong. "No," he replied. "You fought for it. I just stood in your corner." And so, the city that had once made him a legend now honored him not for his fiction, but for his truth. Sylvester Stallone, the quiet champion, the fighter who proved that the greatest victories are not those sung in arenas, but those earned in silence, one life at a time. If you believe that true heroes still walk among us, unsung and unstoppable, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell so you never miss a story that reminds you of the power of heart and the endurance of hope.